Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, former newsroom friends. And good afternoon. Welcome to the Newsroom Pub. I'm Jim Nelson, past president of the Milwaukee Press Club from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, current board member. We're so happy you're here. If you've never been here in the Newsroom Pub, take a look at our historic signature collection and our memorabilia and the other stuff we have around. Board members who are in attendance, Claire, Tom Dakin, myself. We could give you a little background if you want to know a little bit more about what you see around here. Uh, I'm in the unusual position of introducing my boss as our newsmaker today. I'm happy to be here today with Greg Borowski, executive editor of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Greg was named to the board of directors. Greg, who was recently named to the board of directors for the Wisconsin Newspaper Association, has been Journal Sentinel editor since February after former editor George Stanley retired. Greg's a Milwaukee native, and he joined the Journal Sentinel in 1998 as City Hall reporter and was promoted to several editor positions throughout the years, most recently as deputy editor of news, projects, and investigations, working with 11 news staffs around the state with the Journal Sentinel and the other 10 Gannett newsrooms around the state. Before we get started, I want to thank our event sponsors. Our presenting sponsor is Spectrum One News, and our supporting sponsor is We Energies. I would also like to thank our event partner, WisPolitics.com. WisPolitics partners with the Press Club for this luncheon as part of an ongoing series in Milwaukee, sponsored by the UW Milwaukee Wisconsin Academy of Global Education and Training. Other sponsors are 1125 at Pabst, the Medical College of Wisconsin, the Commercial Association of Realtors, and Spectrum. I'd like to welcome our media panel today. Isabel Drull from the Marquette Wire. Isabel's what year? Junior? A junior at Marquette from Omaha. And we've resuming a long-held tradition here that we kind of got away from, but having student journalists on our media panel is something we've done a lot in the past, and we're happy you've joined us today. Next to her is Rich Kirchen, who needs no introduction, but I'll do it anyway, from the Milwaukee Business Journal, longtime journalist and frequent panel member for our Newsmaker Luncheons. We're so happy you're here. And finally, we have Mary Spicuzza from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel newsroom, quizzing her boss and pinch hitting. And we're taking notes because, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. Don't go too hard on them. Anyway, we'll take some questions at the end. We have a hard stop at 1:15, so I'll be back up here to wrangle some questions a little bit before that. Without further ado, Greg Borowski.
All right. Thanks, Jim, and thanks everybody for coming today and for this opportunity to talk a little bit about the Journal Sentinel and what we're up to and all the many great things that are happening now just a few blocks away in that direction rather than that direction. Of course, we're in our new offices over on Kilburn and Broadway. But I was thinking back as I was preparing for this yesterday to when these Newsmaker Luncheons began, and I think I've got this right in that they were in 2004. And they began when the mayor's race was going on. I was a City Hall reporter at the time, and there were like 10 or 11 candidates to replace John Norquist. And every single one of them had a Newsmaker Luncheon. I think Bill Ward and I sat here probably for most of them back in the day and listened to everybody. But what was cool about them was that everybody from Tom Baird and Marvin Pratt and David Clark down to John Pita and Frank Cumberbatch and Sandy Folleron and all these, some names that are totally maybe forgotten now, had the opportunity to come and talk and get their voices heard. So it's really cool to see that this is still going on now, almost 20 years later. The other reminder of that is, gee whiz, I'm feeling old because it's almost 20 years later. But that was a cool aspect. And I just wanted to sort of mention that. And the other thing I was asked earlier about, signing one of the plaques for the wall, which would be quite. I did have an event here years ago when I had my book came out about the Shorewood Messmer football team called First and Long, and we did a book signing event here, and that was also 20 some years ago. So I'm glad to just make news now again in the present day rather than just back then. A couple of things that, when you get a job like this one and are, after a career, and I've been at the Journal Sentinel, as Jim said, for 25 years, you get sort of that reflective nature of how things are so different today than when I started. But I really want to talk about the things that are the same and what hasn't lessened at the Journal Sentinel, and that's our commitment to telling, stories with depth and context and thoroughness. Our desire to reach out to all neighborhoods in the city and all parts of the city, and not just certain corners of the city, and just that commitment to excellence. It's a commitment to deep dive investigative work, around some of the things that have won Pulitzer Prizes or been finalists, and all those are the big things. But what I've really been re-emphasizing for our team since we started is that we don't want to stop doing that kind of journalism, but we want to amplify more day-to-day coverage. And some of you might seem as like a smaller victory, but I'll give a couple examples of one. We had a reporter, I think it was last year, who wrote a story about a Black mathematician who had died, and she had a real significant career and had all these papers that her family wanted to get put somewhere. And after we wrote that story, those papers were presented and given to the Library of Congress. So that's a cool thing. If you're a reporter, you got that done just by telling that story. And it didn't have to take 18 months to do, or 6 months, or even a week. It was just a compelling story about our community that we have to have told. Similarly, we had a reporter do a story about a project at UWM where a professor there, two professors are mapping all of the property covenants for properties sold in the city of Milwaukee. So these are racial covenants about, you can't have a Black family move in or own the property and so forth. And it's an immense job. And our reporter wrote a story about that. And after she wrote the story, so they're crowdsourcing it because they need people to come in and read these covenants and read, 4 or 5 people to read each one and make sure it's accurately written down and entered in the database. And the day that story ran, the team that's working on the project got 300 different people volunteering to participate. Now that's a pretty cool thing too, as a reporter, as you go home from work that day, to know you've had that kind of impact. That same reporter wrote a story about the city's only lynching victim, and had how there was no marker at the gravesite, and that helped get this marker at the gravesite and got things remembered and brought this part of our past back to the present, so we can be more aware of it. So I think those are all the types of things that our team is also focusing on that will, I think, connect us even better with the community, and in a deeper way by getting out and listening, more intently and purposefully with different corners of the community that we've probably, I wouldn't say probably, that we've neglected over the past years. So that's a main priority of our team right now. And I'll mention 2 other initiatives that will give you an idea of what we're trying to accomplish. Okay. All right. Maybe that'll be better. Okay. 2 more examples of what we're trying to accomplish. One is, you've probably seen, or you may have, I hope you've seen, the revival of our public investigator brand, this is a quicker turn, tip-driven accountability stories that can help people get results and things that are frustrating them. It'll expose wrongdoing. It'll expose all sorts of things. The idea is that they're quicker turn and they're tip-driven, because we know there's a lot of great stories out in the community that need to be told. And one that I cite from back when we had Public Investigator in its heyday was a case where Raquel Rutledge wrote a story about a man who was being ticketed out of his house by the city. And there was some rule involved. He had parked his car, it was in his driveway, and the back of the car was extending the public right of way or something like that, and he kept getting ticket after ticket after ticket. And it wasn't until we wrote the story that those tickets stopped because it was so ludicrous that it was going on. And that's the kind of story that we can do more regularly that I think will connect us, better with our community. And another initiative in that same vein is we've added 4 positions just a few months ago to what we call our service desk. And this isn't like a complaint desk, but it's a desk of reporters who are very able to very quickly see what stories people are searching for, to tell stories that with information that people may need. It could be things like, here's things you need to know about this topic. It could be, here's how to park at this event downtown. It could be all sorts of things that people are searching for, because we've come to realize, I think, and I hope maybe a little more deeply than in the past, that yes, people love to read stories, but sometimes they're just looking for information. And it's not terribly helpful to say, if you're a in a house and you're about to be evicted by a landlord and you're wondering what um, your resources are, who can help you, what are your rights as a tenant, to say, well, here's this 80-inch story about problems with the municipal court and landlords. We still want to do those stories. We still will do those stories. We have to better connect those stories with the information that people need. Because if you're in the moment, we want you to be, as a reader and a resident, know you can turn to the Journal Sentinel and rely on us for that information. So we're learn to be a lot better and faster and sort of responsive to those sorts of questions that readers have in the moment. Now, what does this bill that passed mean to me? We got the headline already about the bill was approved and it's moving on, but maybe people are going to know, well, how much of the sales tax am I going to have to pay now that this measure went through, and we can help them navigate that. So I guess I mostly wanted to just mention those things are all a part, I think, for us of evaluating and thinking about how can we be essential to our community. And that means everything from listening better, being more present in the community, telling stories that we know will resonate, but finding those essential stories and spots where we can position ourselves as the newsroom and the biggest newsroom in the state to be able to cover and things that we ought to be essential. If we have 100 journalists in our newsroom, that's a lot. It's less than it's been for sure. But if you told me today, here's an opportunity to start a newsroom from scratch, and we're going to fund you and give you 100 positions to cover news in Milwaukee, Southeast Wisconsin, and the state of Wisconsin, I think a lot of people would jump at that. A lot of nonprofits would kill for that kind of funding. And that's what we've got. So we've got to really make sure that we're putting that to the best possible use, and serving the community as best we can in an essential way, so that they'll be turning to us for that news and information. So I think this is where I turn it over to people here. I've told Mary she can't ask me why I changed her lead 5 years ago on one of her stories, but I'm not sure if they've worked out. She can, but it might get messy. But I know these, I'm not sure if you guys worked out who's going what or where, but fire away.
Is this on? Oh my gosh, it is. Hi, everyone. My name's Izzy. Thank you guys so much for all being here, and thank you for letting me come here and ask you questions. So first things first, just with the cost of printing on the rise and everything, will the Journal Sentinel be making an effort to move towards more like digital content streams, like social media platforms or like online, anything like that?
Yeah, I would say not only are we moving there, we're trying to be there. We sometimes maybe don't move fast enough, and maybe don't have as much the content that's, if you think about TikTok as something that didn't exist even a few years ago, where a lot of people are getting their news there, and it's something we have to master as journalists about how do we get that information in front of them. But it's just really vital to us as a business, as an institution, that you can't count on people to read your content because it landed on their doorstep that morning, or because they're in the habit of going to JS Online first thing in the morning and seeing what's out there. That's a very old school way of thinking, and we have to be past that to survive. So you've got to get your stories where people are are looking and where they're spending their time. And that's just a fundamental necessity to survival, but it also is part and parcel of what I was talking about of being essential to the community. So if you can do great journalism, but if nobody sees it or knows you're doing it, is it as great as it could be? It doesn't take away that story. It might be the most tremendous story out there, and it might have a big impact, or maybe it doesn't have an impact because not enough people saw it and they didn't know to call their council member, or they didn't know that they could do this or that to take action on it. So we want to get where people are. So everyone think about how you consume your own news. Are you? I hope we have more so than some other places. People will come to our homepage, but you might see it on Facebook or an email from a friend or through search or something else that you're looking for that information. Or we want to be at the top on search. We want to be in your social media feeds. We want you to see us. Because if you don't see that we're doing it, it's hard for you to, connect with us.
Of course. And so speaking of like meeting people where they are and everything, people my age and even younger, like people my age don't read the newspaper anymore. They mostly, get news through social media and stuff. What are you doing at the Journal Sentinel to like cater to those younger generations and get them interested in news?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is getting onto the platforms where people are. It's a big challenge to the industry in terms of, how do you make money by doing that, but that still doesn't mitigate the need to be there. I mean, the other things that we do and need to do is to sort of position how reporters think of their job, and if they're and you would experience this in any industry where things are changing rapidly, and there are probably few out there where they've changed as rapidly as in ours, but that you've got people who came into the business. I'm one of them. I was really before the internet. I tell students, it's like, where did you park your horse and the buggy and all that kind of stuff? But it's so different, that when I started out as a reporter in Marion, Indiana, a small town, we could deliver news to you one way. That's, ink on paper at 6 a.m. in the morning, hopefully earlier, on your doorstep. But now think about all the ways you can do it. You got video, and you got audio, and you got interactive graphics, and you've got readers can comment and engage with you, and you can, watch the Packer game with Tom Silverstein and see his comments right in the middle of the game. And that's just so different than where we began. And things are changing so fast that it's sometimes hard for us to keep up if a whole new generation comes along, if a whole new device or technology or platform is out there, because we've got to then kind of adjust and figure it out and try to come to it in an authentic way, because no one wants to see me dancing on TikTok. Okay. Least of all my daughter. Well, Mary raised her hand. So Mary, we have one who wants to see me dancing on TikTok, but she's not going to. But it's sort of like we need to come at it in an authentic way. And part of what we've been doing, a lot of our newer hires are folks who are more recent graduates, who are more of the age and in our sort of where we need to grow our readership. So we're hoping and counting on them to help lead the way and not to have to take a back seat of like, well, this is how we've always done it. We have to write the story this way. Let's write it in a different way. Let's write it in a more compelling way. If you wouldn't read the story you write, I don't want you writing that story, so.
And like speaking of like hiring recent grads and like, staying on top of those things, coming into it authentically, is it important for rising journalists to be well-rounded in like other, content streams like social media, just like besides writing?
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm hiring somebody today, it used to be you could hire somebody and be like, okay, you're just a really great writer. Or you've got, you're a wordsmith, or you're a digger on, finding the documents. But now we need people who can do that and more. And you may need to, take video. You may need to learn more about databases. And even if you can't crunch all the numbers yourself, you at least need to know what can be done with the numbers if somebody else crunches them for you, so that you can take advantage of all those tools. Because it's like, if anyone, I can imagine the reverse, or I see myself from the old kind of the pre-internet days in that world to today. And if you took a student today and said, okay, here's how you're gonna get your news. You're gonna get it from, from, I don't know, Walter Cronkite or Tom Brokaw in the evening, and your paper is going to arrive. Or for a long time, we had two papers, and that's it. And you can't hear a voice from somebody. You can only see the video on TV. People would just be like, "My God, how did you survive?" So it's the same, culture shock sometimes for us today of like, here's another new thing to learn, another new thing to learn. But we need reporters and editors who are coming in who are proficient in more than one thing. When I started out, you could be hired if you're a great wordsmith. I mean, today I want a great wordsmith who also knows how to shoot video and tell a story in multiple ways so that they can do it and probably write it on deadline, and then come back with an enterprise piece, for the next day.
And then this will just be my last one. I have several friends that have done internships with you guys. TJ is there right now. He's my friend. I was just wondering, like, are there any changes coming towards the internship system anytime soon? Or like what about your publication is different from others, and why should students come to you guys?
I would say one thing we have always heard from our interns as they complete their time here is how accessible, welcoming, and supportive our staff is with them. And that's across the board. And I think that's really a part and parcel of the great newsroom we have, and why I feel so fortunate to be in the role I am with our newsroom. But people will come in and they will get experience and they get thrown in right away. They're going to be getting good advice and mentorship from other reporters. So I think that really distinguishes us in many respects. I mean, the other thing, candidly, that has changed and really helps set up our program is we've gotten a lot of support for internships from other institutions. We have some that are through University of Wisconsin-Madison, some through Marquette, some through Yale University, different places that as our budget has been getting tighter and tighter, we will finish this year. I think we have one more. We're still trying to sneak in a photo intern that will extend into January because we have one on a fellowship, or one of our full timers. But we're going to end up with 20 interns in the course of the year. And if I tell that to other editors of Gannett Properties or elsewhere, that's just an astronomical number for them. But we've been able to do it by finding support in the community for our work, to get students that hands-on experience, and they get a really good experience when they're in our newsroom.
Thank you so much.
So in terms of the question on the economics of print, an actual print product, I think just about all the Gannett papers, except for the Journal Sentinel, some time ago, maybe a year ago, eliminated Saturday print publication. So my question is that something that might happen for Journal Sentinel? Might you drop some other days? And in the long run, what's the future and the longevity of the print edition?
Okay, this is, I told Jim before I agreed to do this that I don't want to walk out of here with a headline. So yeah, no, it's the headline or a lunch. And
I'm not writing anything without a headline.
Okay. So I can say, I mean, no one has shared with me some specific plan that on day X, the Journal Sentinel will do this or do that or do the other thing. To the contrary, right now, the company has been working, and we've always worked at how do we maintain value in the print product, because it's still we still have a substantial number of print subscribers. It's still a valuable tool, to deliver the news to folks, and some simply that's how they get their paper. That's how they get the news. It's a habit. It's something they've grown up around, that they're based around. And excuse me, we had some problems with the press last night. It wasn't really actually with the press, it was the pre-press area where they were designing pages, which slowed down our delivery here. And this morning I got one email from a reader saying, my paper hasn't been delivered. I know there's problems with it. I just want to make sure it's delivered soon. And sometimes my initial reaction is like, well, if you know it's going to be delivered, why are you pestering me about this? But really what it tells me when you get those messages, somebody really, really wants to read that paper. They took time out of it to send the email, to track down my address and get it to me and find out. So there is a huge value in that, and the company's been working to maintain that and stabilize that as best as possible. At the same time, it would be foolish to say that that's how we can survive long term into the future, because Izzy's not picking up the paper, right? I mean, I don't know how many of you, I hope everybody here subscribes. That'd be awesome. But I'm betting some of you, before you picked up your paper, you might have went to your phone and went to our app, or got online, or you saw something on Twitter and you clicked on that too. So we have to be able to do both things well, and to re-envision the print product as, I mean, that's not the best delivery device for breaking news. I mean, it's anyone who would think that is just crazy, because I mean, if you said in the abstract, we can give you this one thing, we'll deliver it to you on print on ink on paper at 6 a.m. tomorrow on your doorstep, or we're going to give you everything instantly in this device that you carry around in your pocket, and it would have audio and video and everything else, everyone would vote that the other one is more vital for breaking news. So we've got to figure out how to manage that transition, which is a big challenge for us, but it's also a big challenge for every newspaper out there. There is to be able to provide both, elements for the, for the readers that we've got. But there isn't, no one has showed me a plan that this is X day or whatever, but we have to be constantly preparing for that, because that day will, I'm sure, arrive at some point.
The Milwaukee printing plant closed, about a year and a half ago? Anyway, whenever it was.
So, yeah.
And printing moved to Peoria, which made your deadlines even earlier and made the news less fresh. My survey is, if you go in a coffee shop or you go to an airport, I'm the only person who has a newspaper, and I really feel old. And then I show them my grandfather wallet. And clearly the most recent print circulation numbers we have is what was in the last Gannett 10K, and I think the daily was around 48,000, which is small fraction of what it used to be. So it just seems like, even though Gannett is consolidating printing in a smaller number of presses, that at some point there's diminishing returns, and as older people either stop subscribing or
I asked Jim to do that because it's a tough question.
Thanks, Jim.
Can you turn it up, Jim?
How do you respond to that?
All right, there's a lot embedded in there. The first thing I want people to think about is print. Print is just one thing we do, as I said. And if you measure strictly print subscribers, you're not capturing the total number of people who are engaging with us on a regular basis. You're not capturing people who may be subscribing just digital only, who, maybe you've moved away and you're subscribing, or maybe you just like the digital, product better. I'm going to try to get at the essence of your question. That the music did throw me for a second there with what I was thinking, train of thought. But the printing facility, of course, we all know, moved to Peoria. That changed our deadlines. They are much earlier than they used to be. But what that allows us to do, and I always try to say, okay, here's what we've got to work with, and this is sort of the facts of life out there. So let's see how we make the best out of that. So we've been trying to make the print product more enterprisey and forward-looking than before, because it's going to be rare that we have something break right on deadline for print, and it'll feel super fresh the next morning. So for instance, I will tell reporters and encourage them and cajole them that if you're writing a breaking story for online, get the basics out there for online. We've probably got links to past stories about it. There's plenty of information for people about what happened in that moment. Were you, as a reporter, as a beat reporter, and you have this great expertise, you've got something that isn't a commodity. Evers vetoed something, the assembly passed something. That's commodity information. Everybody's got it. And if you see it in your feed, why click on the second or the third or the fourth one that says assembly passes such and such? The stadium measure yesterday was an example. But if you write the basics and you cover that base, Now you've got an opportunity to put a bow on that story and turn your attention to what's next? Is it going to pass the Senate? Was there some surprise changeover in votes, and how did that occur? And that's the story that we want to wind up in the print edition, so that you're seeing greater context and depth than just that headline that went through. So as I start off to say, first, I mean, again, it's problematic if you just say, well, let's just look at your print subscribers, or let's just look at your print and digital subscribers, because we have other readers out there too who are coming to us. And frankly, you can make money off of people who are coming to you because you could sell ads to that audience and everything else. There's a bigger, picture to that on that puzzle. The last thing I would just throw out there and add, and this is where I think some people have heard me say this before, perhaps. We've got some former Journal and Sentinel folks in the room, that if you think about how hard it is today for a reporter, if you're writing that breaking story in the moment, you're writing kind of a Sentinel story in the old days, right? That a lot of things news-wise happened on the Sentinel's deadline, as opposed, by and large, to the Journal's deadline. And if you're writing that enterprise piece that covers what's happening next in the greater context, well, now you're writing a Journal story, kind of broadly speaking, that you've got time to step back and think about it and dig in. So I'm asking you, as that one reporter, to do both. And I'm also asking you to tweet in the middle of the news as it's happening, because some people are following that and they want to see how quickly you're doing and how you're covering it. And then I'm asking you to stop when you're done, and either yourself or another reporter to say, okay, you took that information. Is that the best way how readers are searching for it and consuming that information? Let's tell it in another way. And you probably also have to find out the photographer and the video and everything else. So the job today is immensely harder than it used to be. And we're asking reporters like Mary to do immensely more than we used to. And I'll be here, if I'm here next year at some event, I'll say that it's harder next year than it is this year, because everything is changing. As Izzy said, there's new platforms and new things. We didn't, a few years ago, have to say, well, who's doing the TikTok video and what's our TikTok strategy? But we've got to keep constantly adapting to that, which is why I always look at where our growth is going, and that's where we want to put even more effort to make sure we don't lose out. And our numbers in terms of people engaging with our content and reading our stories, they've been up year over year. They've been up month over month. So that's good.
So what are the numbers, I guess, because, right, we only see the Circulation Bureau audit number for print. The company's not releasing the digital numbers anymore. What do you estimate, or what do you tell your advertisers your audience is in a given day or week? Print, digital, JS Online?
Yeah, I can say this is where I have to fall back a little bit, because our corporate folks say we don't comment on specific numbers. I can say we're growing, and I can say that when you look at those numbers that are in those reports, you have to be really careful about what they're measuring and what they're not measuring, and that their measuring stick has changed over time. So if you try to draw a comparison to, say, 20 years ago or 30 years ago or whatever, it's not even necessarily 2 years ago or 3 years, a linear thing to be able to say that. And if you do that and were to describe it as this is the Journal Sentinel readership, as opposed to this is a portion of its monetary base, I guess would be one way to think about it, then you're just measuring part of it, and that's where it's really hard. I'm dealing with a big corporation. They're not going to comment about these things. I'm sure they're telling an advertiser how many impressions your ad's going to get and all these different things, but that gets kind of beyond my area. Okay, here we go.
I still haven't
I'll
forgot.
tell you why I changed that lead.
No, I'm thinking we could do a TikTok dance with you and like have it go viral or something and, market that. So I'm getting visions.
Yeah. And that's right when my daughter moves out of the house and files for whatever it is, where you can become a.
So just a few things. We've lost a lot of institutional knowledge at the paper. Some of them are sitting in the audience, I would say. But How is it going, and what are you doing to kind of train the next generation of journalists so they know not just how to do a TikTok, but how to check a jail log or courts records, or like just reporting basics that they might not have, learned in J school?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're very focused on that through training initiatives, through trying to get mentors for folks when they come in the door with other, more veteran journalists. I will say, if we want, in terms of headlines, we have been hiring. We've done a ton of hiring over this past year. Since I began, we've either hired or promoted 24 different people. I tallied that up before I came over. And every time we do that, there's an opportunity to look around and say, okay, is that beat exactly the beat we want, or is that sort of a legacy beat that we've had and structured in a certain way, or do we need to change it? Do we need to say this, this, beat? And I'm thinking of one that we retooled around the healthcare industry, and I remember writing into the description that we want a reporter who thinks of this from the waiting room and not just the boardroom, because we want to see consumers and how you're engaging with healthcare. So we look at every position and sort of retool it that way to say, how do we meet the needs of our audience? But as we've brought in people, we've brought in some really, really talented people. Some of them have just started within, I think we've had 4 start in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And you're going to see these bylines over time that are, 2 are graduates of Columbia, one's a Missouri graduate. Most of them have some local connection to the community. These are folks who do good journalism and have been trained in journalism in all of these skills and things that I had to learn. Rich had to learn, Mary had to learn, Izzy's learning them, because it's more ingrained in the curriculum. So they're coming in with some of that knowledge. But you're right, you'd lose, as anyone retires in any industry, some of that institutional knowledge. But we do have quite a few folks on our staff who've been there for 30 years or longer and have some of that knowledge. A lot of those folks were in editing roles, so as you're interacting and engaging with other reporters and stories, you've got that background where you can say, hey, don't forget about this, or this isn't the first time that happened, go pull that clip and look it up. So there's something, I would just say we're mindful of it, but I would also say that what we're gaining by the new hires we've got with their enthusiasm and their ability to tell stories in different ways is a huge benefit as well.
No disrespect to Peoria, but is there any chance that the Journal Sentinel and other Gannett papers would be printed in Wisconsin again?
There's probably
Don't fire me for asking.
What's that?
Don't fire me for asking.
To me, the bigger question is is it likely that the deadlines will ever become later? And I think we have to function as a newsroom with the assumption that they won't. If they do, that'll be tremendous. We'll get some extra games in the paper and some of the scores and things, but none of that changes the fundamental need for us to figure out how do we deliver that product that isn't the best product for delivering breaking news in a way that people will still identify with and still purchase and engage with and read and so on. So even if the deadlines got magically went back a few more hours, it's not going to change the need for what we have to do. And if you sort of measure, well, what that would affect is, it's a big effect on sports, of course. But when I started out, a small paper in Indiana, we had a press right in the building, the Marion Chronicle Tribune. And on the one hand, we were the hardest working reporters around because we had a staff of like 7 or 8. On the other hand, it was like, we wasted so much time. It was just incredible. We would, go to interview and do another interview. And then we'd go out to dinner together because we had a small group of, folks who were all around the same age. Then we'd come back and we'd file our story, and then we'd file it later. And it was like, the amount of free work we gave the company was immense, but also that story in most cases didn't change. It didn't benefit from us filing it at midnight, from filing it at 3 o'clock or whenever it was. So that, we'd have to really look at what how many things are truly breaking at that point in the day that gets you that, and is that worth it? I mean, those are all the things that the company is going to look at, as well as capacity on the presses, and can you operate, how many printing facilities can you operate if they aren't all working close to capacity? When, before Gannett and when we were the Journal Sentinel here in Journal Communications, there was always a push to print other news publications on our presses, because to make it profitable, you had to have it running, darn near all the time. And if you say that every property gets smaller in terms of their circulation, and there's fewer presses, papers that have to come off the press, it just puts more and more pressure on, how do you get those to capacity? There's probably some scenarios for someday, maybe, but we just can't count on it.
We have 2 minutes left
Okay.
for audience questions.
Before audience
Yes?
questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Wow. It's got to be good. Chicago, speaking of printing presses, there's a rumor a year or so back Chicago Tribune might be looking at the West Milwaukee plant. Have you heard anything about that?
I have not.
Okay.
I do know they'd moved some things to Arlington Heights or something, so I don't know what their plans are on
Okay.
West Milwaukee.
Just the delivery issue and the product, again, going back to that, deliveries, at where I live now, it depends on who the delivery person is, but now we get it after 8 o'clock in the morning, which is too late. So we dropped our print except for Wednesday and Sunday. The papers are smaller. The outstate papers, the other 10 Gannett papers, Oshkosh Northwestern, some others that I see, Green Bay Press Gazette, there's not much in there. And I just have a hard time understanding why anyone would subscribe to that. I mean, how do you make that product valuable enough that people are going to keep getting it, paying for it?
Well, I mean, that's a big nut that we have to crack. We did in Milwaukee, we added, I think a year and a half ago, I think it was 8 to 10 pages to our Sunday product. And I could see down the line that maybe there's more things like that done to give them more heft and more information. I do know that on a daily basis, we're producing, in terms of our newsroom, many more stories than we were producing even a year ago at this time. And a lot of them are finding their way into the papers. It's a balancing act, because you'll sometimes get like, well, why don't you have enough news about what's happening in Israel? Or why haven't you written about this or that? And then the others say, well, why didn't you get more local news and other things in the paper? We got to keep trying, but I don't think anyone has the magic, answer at the moment to figure that out. But I do know, if you look at, other business models, and, some of them are struggling too, but, why does someone read Time Magazine? Why do they pick up the Business Journal? If they could get, that's a week, you get
Well, I
one
can tell you.
opportunity, right? I mean, we're on your doorstep 7 days a week. And like, well, is the news all old in the Business Journal? I hope not. I'm sure you found different ways to address that. And we just have to figure out this, have the same challenges that we face, the same ones that Izzy faces at the Market Wire. They publish once a week with the Print Tribune. And I've been on the media board there for a long time and working with them to get, that same sort of change around, if you're only writing once a week and the game happened, you publish on Tuesday and the game is on Tuesday night. Okay, well, are you writing a game story, or are you doing something totally different? And we just all have to figure that out and understand what the virtues of that delivery method are, as well as, what the audience will want, and do as best we can with the situation we're in.
Time for a few questions. Jeff.
In the intro, reference to the Master of Charlotte, a great story, you used words like racial covenants. You could have added redlining, or most segregated, or in Peter Fagan's terms, most racist. In his talk at the Business Journal event for the RNC, Ted Kelly talked about the Afterglow convention in terms of visitor days and revenue. From the Journal Sentinel standpoint, what kind of an afterglow on race and segregation and opportunity would you like to see after the convention that
When you mentioned the
Journal
convention, you're
Sentinel
talking about the
contribute?
RNC next year?
You mentioned the
Yeah,
convention.
yeah.
talking
I
about
mean,
the
first, I
RNC,
mean, we're
the convention.
like anyone
Yeah,
else.
yeah.
We love our city, and it's great to have the convention here. I mean, obviously it's nothing short of a huge opportunity to elevate the city and its role in the tourism and all the stories and things around here. So we're plotting our convention coverage in what I would call 4 different kind of lanes, and I'll come back to your question then on there. Just to understand the perspective we're coming at is that it's a huge opportunity, and some people will come to us because you're a political junkie and you want to know what's happening in that convention hall and how it affects the nominee or the fall race or whatever it is. There's a whole lane of business opportunities in the city for entrepreneurs and people trying to sort of make a buck through the hospitality industry, the hotels. Similarly, there's a lane or an audience of visitors to the community because we'll have, I forget what the tallies are, but tens of thousands of people here who are going to want to know what restaurant to go to and what are some sites to see, and if I add 4 days to my trip to Milwaukee, where could I go? So we're trying to address that. And then there's going to be people who just want to know, can I park in my garage by my downtown office? And what streets are going to be closed? And where should I stay away from? So we're going to try to address all of those. But part of that too, and I guess I would say it's less convention focused, more election focused, in that we've got to be listening to our residents, I only call them not our readers and our potential readers. People, what are they interested in? What issues do they need information on? How are they going to decide what to vote on? And how do we distinguish one candidate from the next? And to get back to some of the key issues that they're talking about. And in our community, I mean, it's no secret that there's terrible segregation patterns. There's huge gaps between outcomes by race and by ethnicity and other things. And these are all things that we need to wrestle with as a community. And we need to do a better job at the Journal Sentinel of not just highlighting those issues, because we will highlight, I could probably pick an issue, and I could probably find a major project we did that highlighted all the problems, but how do we engage in a productive way the leadership? How do we engage in a productive way people who have stories to tell and voices to be heard? How do we use our platform to elevate issues like that? When we have an opportunity to talk to a candidate or ask them questions, what questions are we asking them? Are we asking them, hey, you came in to talk with our editorial board, how are you doing in the polls? Are we asking them, hey, what is your plan for dealing with A, B, or C? And that's, I think, where we've got to think of it more from the election coverage than the convention itself. Because, I mean, in some respects, I mean, the convention, I mean, they're here for a week and they're gone, and they're that audience of the convention, whoever is at the podium accepting the nomination, they're not talking to us, right? I mean, not specifically to Milwaukee, they're talking to everybody out there, and their message is going to be geared toward the wide audience and who they're trying to move, and independent voters here, there. I mean, obviously Wisconsin's a key state, but they might be going, I got to get a message to voters in Pennsylvania or Arizona. And they're going to be less focused on what are the problems we've got here in Milwaukee and Wisconsin that are long-term, but the Journal Sentinel's not going anywhere. These other business journals not, the Wire's not. We can all write those stories that help elevate the issues that are more enduring and meaningful for the long term for the community.
Slightly different question. The times now are a little bit like the 1930s. They run up to the 1930s up to World War II, and World War II look a lot like what's going on right now. That changed journalism, as I understand. Oral's voice comes to mind, and how many other things changed. It created a whole generation of journalism after the war. How are people developing a strategy? It looks like we've got a war going on. Not just Israel and Gaza. I've been to Gaza. This is just part of it. I've been to the area a lot, and I know this looks like the whole Middle East. Other enemies are massing at different places to take advantage of these things. We're stretched thin. How are we preparing to cover that and make it both relevant locally and to get in? I mean, the Journal sent people, to the Battle of the Bulge. I don't know that he's doing that now, but what do you have a strategy to readjust the coverage for a world
Yeah,
that's
I mean, I would say,
crazy?
I mean, I agree. The world is going crazy, as the world gets smaller, stories that are happening on the other side of the globe are important here too. Um, I mean, in addition to the Battle of the Bulge, I'll highlight a old friend of a lot of ours who passed away, Meg Jones, who went to Afghanistan, I don't know how many times, in Iraq. And, we've made that commitment when there are, our soldiers are at the front lines. And I think more so than most places sent people with often local, reserve units or groups that could tell that story. I think it's, when it's a story like Israel and Hamas and the Gaza Strip, Sophie Carson's doing a heck of a job for us right now as someone who generally is a GA reporter, but also covers faith and religion. And she's found a lot of good local ties to help readers here understand the connections in the Middle East. The Journal Sentinel is never going to be the spot to give you the day-to-day, the breakdown of this happened and that happened and other thing happened. It's just impractical to be everywhere, and we don't have the expertise to do it. But we can tap into the Associated Press, to the USA Today, who has someone on the ground over there and things like that. And we've got to figure out how to, provide readers with both kind of things. Here's the local story. Here's the big picture, and how do you connect them? But even in the World War II, I mean, you might have the paper sent someone to the Battle of the Bulge, or we sent Meg Jones and others to, Iraq, but she didn't cover the Iraq War. She covered, this unit and these soldiers who were over there and how they were experiencing and faring, and she did an incredible job at that, and we want to continue that kind of legacy.
So I was the Journal's last ombudsman, handling the complaints and some compliments, and writing a column about it. But in the era where we have such great polarization, where there's attacks on mainstream news media and others as having fake news, and the drumbeat keeps increasing, what kinds of criticisms do you hear? Have you seen changes in the last 2 decades on how those issues are being raised?
It's I think the volume of those sorts of complaints have gone up. And I should have mentioned that before, and all the difficulties and challenges of being a reporter. That, when I started off in my first job, someone could mail you a letter if they were complaining about it, or in Marion, Indiana, they might come down and come to the newsroom and talk to you, or they would pick up the phone. And there was sort of something they had to put more of themselves behind their complaints and what they're doing. If I saw you standing there and we could talk it out and figure out, come to an understanding what your complaint was and why I did what I did, we could all walk away happy. Okay, now people can, anonymously send an email. They can, tweet you in a different way. They can just send some of the most horrible, abusive, disrespectful things, and they can walk away feeling, yeah, I feel good about it, and not because they're trying to be productive, but because they feel better to get it off their chest. And the ones who do email, and I try to respond to just about all of the emails eventually. Sometimes it's easier than others. Days it's easier than others based on the volume, but I always try to give a thoughtful response. And sometimes that works, and someone comes back and says, I didn't see it that way. But often I'll turn it back on them and say, okay, so if you are writing me an email that says, how can the Journal Sentinel be such a liberal rag or such a conservative, whatever, and I get both of them, sometimes back to back. And it's like, if I could just get you two guys in a room, you could figure out who I should be responding to, because I can't be both, but I will say, give me some specific examples. If you find something that's a misleading headline, we can fix that. But if you just spew at us and say, you're terrible and you don't recover this and all that. What am I supposed to do with that? It's like, okay, I can tell you we're not, and you can say we are, and we can go back and forth until we're all done. But that doesn't help anything. So when I've done that, I have sometimes gotten a response to this is what I'm talking about. Why was a headline written this way? And sometimes we fix the headline. Sometimes we say, well, no, you're misreading it, and we can, but if you're misreading it, maybe others are too, and we still have to clarify the headline. But I need a specific example. I feel like if you're going to come to me and complain, you can't just say the journal is garbage and I would never subscribe to it. It's like, great, thanks. Now I know that. But I would rather have you say, why did this story, why did you contact this source and not that source? What about this information? Isn't that important too? And then I can look at it, and the reporter can look at it, and other editors can. You can say, okay, they have a point. We can work on that. But if all you give is the venom and the and that, and I'll share one example of one of the first emails I got. And sometimes when I respond, I can be a little pointed at times. But someone, I think we had listed our Report for America reporters, who right now the ones that we have at the Journal Sentinel and in Wisconsin elsewhere are all women. Okay, they're all tremendous reporters. We have someone covering the Great Lakes who's a climate scientist with a PhD. These are super talented people in each of these roles. And the email was filled with expletives and things. This, what about 50-50 representation? And it should really be so many men versus women, and F you and this. And I just politely responded. I said, I understand the point you're making, but would you also like me to apply that to the sports pages? And I never heard back. Okay, so it's sort of like, people, and that's what you get. And I just sort of, I'll respond. I didn't hear back. I'm sure, knew I wouldn't, but maybe it caused someone to think about it a little bit. And I haven't heard back from that guy, at least not from that email address. Who knows? Maybe he's flaming me from a different address.
I know a lot of the interns are paid by foundations and other places. How many of the year-round staffers are paid by other sources other than the Journal Sentinel? And how much staff time does one person or several people have to dedicate to finding those sources? Does that take away from
it's
something
a really
else?
good question. I would say we've done a tremendous job at building connections with institutions in this community, the O'Brien Fellowship at Marquette. George Stanley and I helped get that going. I'm on the board there. That provides a position in the sense that it's a different person every year who's there doing the project, but that's a standing thing. We also often will seek out grants for a particular project. I've had reporters say, I had one who was like, I have this great story about the paper industry, but I really have to go to China. And I didn't want to go. At the time, I was investigations editor and projects editor. I didn't want to say, George, how much money have you got in the budget for us to go to China? So I said, John, this was a reporter, John Schmidt. I said, we're going to get you to China. Just give me a little time. And we found a grant through the Pulitzer Center on crisis reporting. They've changed it to just the Pulitzer Center, and they fund overseas travel about issues of local importance. And it was perfect. So we got that opportunity. So it's very important for us, if we're looking to maintain the quality of the journalism and everything that you as readers and residents expect to see and want in your newspaper, my job is to figure out how to do that. And often these days, it could be looking for opportunities like that. If somebody's going to fund travel for something that we didn't have, I'm going to go for it. If somebody's going to say we can sponsor a project for you or backfill a position while you're working on something, we're going to take that up. It's hard to say how much time is involved, because it's some of my time, it's some of Jim Fitzhenry's time, it's some of other editors' time. I would love, and if anyone knows someone with deep enough pockets, it would be great if someone would say, hey, what we'll fund for you is a position that helps seek grants and support and maintains them and manages them. Because that would be the single most important thing that someone could do if they wanted to make a difference for us, I think, because then we can go out and spend more time on that and not do it, piecemeal.
Thank you
All right, thank you.